AURN Digital into our Black Fatherhood special. My name is Castell JR Barnes. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm actually partnered today with two distinguished panelists. Beside me, I'm here with
Calvin. I'm also an entrepreneur.
And
my name is Keith White. I'm an attorney.
All right, so you're tuned in for a special. This is going to be super, super good. The topic of discussion today is how the Black community has substituted for biological fathers who are absent. Let's go.
I want to take a step back and just kind of like, I guess, maybe pivot the prompt, right? What is fatherhood? And I think that the question of what is fatherhood, probably we've been trained to think about fatherhood as someone who provides food, clothing, and shelter. And so these institutions, my institution, the Brooklyn Combine, with my partner, that's something that we take responsibility for in our community. Right. But I think that if we start thinking a little bit more holistically about what fatherhood is, then it involves so much more. And I think that to your point, the church or any faith-based institution whose values are aligned with the community that they're serving, there's an opportunity to serve that need. But I do think that the narrative about absentee fatherhood is also a little bit overstated. And I think that that's something that's part of our responsibility to make sure that we get in front of that narrative and make sure that people understand that that's purposeful.
It is overstated.
I mean, to speak on that too, like Keith, it is really. It's kind of like no good men are out there, right? And I'm like, everybody I know is
we're sitting here. We're here. We're fathers. We're men.
I mean, honestly, but I don't want to overstate me being like a good man, good father. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like I think that we're all human beings, and I think that we're all experiencing this life thing at the same time.
Right.
And how we handle traumas and how we perpetuate or do not perpetuate those traumas is symptomatic of who we are, but it also informs our fatherhood, our husbandhood, all of the different, our professionalism, all the different things that we do. Yeah. And I think that, I'm not here to say, oh, I'm some exceptional guy, I'm some exceptional father, but I'm here to say that I've seen so many examples of amazing fathers and not, in my community, outside of my community, that I don't buy into that narrative that Black men just aren't here.
Yeah. Something you said just now, trauma, I think that's huge. Something that I realized in my upbringing as a Caribbean American or Caribbean, coming from the Caribbean, was that we weren't taught or told how to express our emotions as a man.
Put it on God.
Yeah, you just put it on God, or you just kind of repress it. You don't really have an outlet or have a way to deal with certain stresses and certain traumas. And I think that's very, toxic when, as a young person growing up and not necessarily having a place or an understanding of how, I'm dealing with this thing, but as a man, I'm told to I gotta show no hurt, I gotta be a little bit more. Tough.
That's where I've been blessed. I think I had I still have. My father is very involved, has always been very involved in my life. He's my best friend. And from a very young age, told me it's okay to cry. Told me that it's okay, it's okay to feel. Right. I think that I still bought into other aspects of toxic masculinity and still participated in the things that I knew weren't indicative of who I was as a man. Right. But I was able to kind of come back to the example that my father provided.
So even with and thinking about what defines fatherhood, is it the duty itself, or is it responsibility, or is it biological?
I mean, I don't think that it really has anything to do with biological. And that may not be, that may not be popular opinion, but and this is kind of going off the path a little bit, but I think that I've seen examples of amazing parenting and fatherhood structures that aren't coming from men, or that are coming from men. you know, and I think that it's not necessarily about biologically what you've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really about what you're equipped, what you have the capacity to do,
Yeah.
and making sure, you know, there's a whole system of oppressive behaviors
That's what I was-
that are like pressuring communities of color.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that one of our responsibilities is to make sure that we're not perpetuating those traumas onto our children, that
Absolutely.
we're breaking cycles of generational bondage that have started from before slavery.
Yep.
And I think that, you know, if we start recognizing what those traumas are, we start processing what we're experiencing, we start unpacking the experiences as human beings that we're having, I think that we become better equipped at being providers
The idea
of information.
Yeah, the idea of not necessarily being a biological, not defining fatherhood as just being a biological construct, because sometimes you're called to be, you know, a father figure, you know, just because there might be a relative or someone who, you know, have young boys or girls, and you're called to do certain duties and certain things, and you know that's been the case in my experience. And so that's important, you know, recognizing that, you know, to be a father doesn't mean that, you know, you have to father these children. Sometimes in just the community, you know, you might be kids who you don't necessarily relate to, but you see them doing something, and we know the old stories of, you know, the community raising. It takes a village. It takes a village,
for sure, man.
You know, as opposed to, you know, seeing somebody on the court or the park somewhere doing something, and you'd be like, nah. I know your parents, you know, chill.
That's community.
You know, yeah, that's the community. Yeah, so it's not necessarily just the biological aspect of it.
Which is good. I also, because I've stepped in, you know, I've dated in the past someone with kids, right? And I've always perpetuated and kind of permeated that idea of, you know, a father is somebody, or any parental figure is somebody that loves, earn, and provide.
How was that experience though? Dating someone with a child, like how does how do you reprimand? How do you step in and be like an authority in that child's life when you're not?
Well, a biggest thing is not to be a dictator, because I came into a new relationship with a daughter, right? And my daughter gained a bonus mom, right? Without that. So the best thing I think is to come in with love.
That's right.
And understand that parenthood is not dictatorship, right? It's really about giving space for opinions, but also guiding, right? And I think when we come in as parents, right, we're taught, do what I say. This is what it is. This is the way. I'm your father now. I'm step pop. I'm here trying to beat my chest. Well, that's not what it's about.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
You know, it's really, I think if we get away from biological, like, you made me, take care of me, what you're supposed to do, that's your responsibility, right? But then really defining what's parenthood.
That's true,
right? Because there's people who are having babies,
right?
And just because I put a roof over your head and I work and feed and bathe you, is that parenthood?
That's enough, right?
Is that enough?
That's
right?
not enough.
To where I won't resent you when I get older, right? So I think it's just a matter of understanding that it's not substitution, it's addition. Yeah. Right? And we all get round to it, and mental, you know, traumas is real, especially within the Black community, and also building on your point, systemic stuff as well. Mass incarceration. That's right. A lot of crippling through hyper anti-sexual feminism, right? Which is kind of male and woman working together, right? You have this hyper intensity of, I'm a feminist and I could do this all by myself, where it's really about intersexual feminism. Right. Well, I think that the rise of feminism, and I'm not informed as a woman to speak on the issue, so I'm not speaking from a feminist perspective, but I'm speaking as a male feminist, right? But I think that the feminism was a response to patriarchal attitudes of privilege, and so there needed to be a pushback, and I think that that pushback was healthy, and the pushback continues to be healthy. But I do think that, to your point, that it's not so much about providing, because and this is where I failed as a father, right? I failed as a father at times where I felt like, oh, well, I'm providing a meal, I'm providing shelter, clothing, and I'm home, right? But
I'm on my phone. You
That's
know,
right.
my wife is like, you know, hey, you're on social media.
You're working.
You're doing this. You're working. You're doing all these other things.
Yeah, man.
But you're not having conversations.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that you can be an absentee father while you're physically present.
That's
and
right. That's right.
you'll be an absentee father, absent in values.
That's right.
And the reason why that's most important is because the world is pushing a whole subset of values on our children.
That's right.
And if they're not aligned with things that are sustainable, things that we believe about the future, then it's our responsibility to push back on those
That's right.
things.
Yeah.
And you know, that is the hard part. That's the hard part of fatherhood, right? Like you know, obviously providing food, clothing, and shelter, and all those things can be tough, but being able to communicate and connect with your kids,
That's right.
in
Yeah.
a way where in a way where they respect you, and they appreciate what you have to say, and they learn from you. That's the hard work.
Yeah, man.
You know?
Stopping the work when you get home and taking time. Like literally, my wife, sometimes she's just like, you know, you have to sit down, like stop, get off the phone, put the phone down.
Yeah.
You know, my son, and this is the beautiful thing about being an entrepreneur. I pick my son up from school every day.
Yeah.
You know, I'm able to come home, and as soon as he gets there, he's like, Dad, the train, let's play train tracks. And you know, I'm like, but I got to do this other thing. But taking that hour, however long it is, you know, it's like, man, this is worth it, you know, because you see him just really connect more. And stepping out of corporate 9 to 5, and I don't mean everyone can do that, really did free up that time.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, that's a value that, you know, you can't put a dollar sign on.
So I wonder,
it's inclusive too.
Yeah,
I
man.
think that's
one of my best memories of hanging out with my dad, right? And this is completely flawed and problematic, right? But I don't know which birthday it was. I was probably turning like 8 or 9 years old, right?
Yeah.
And my dad is like, all right, we're gonna hang out. And he takes me to see 48 Hours. 48 Hours is an Eddie Murphy.
Throwback, yeah, man.
It's a great movie, but it's not for like a 9-year-old,
Yeah.
right? And so, but it was hilarious, and we had popcorn, and we hung out, and we talked, and the content of the movie didn't even matter.
Yeah.
It was something he wanted to do, so he took me with him.
Yeah.
But it was the process. He invited me into his process.
That's right, yeah.
And that's something that is ingrained in my memory. And we've done, you know, I hang out with my dad, we work out, we do things all the time.
Right.
But him inviting me into his process when I was that young, that was like, you know, life changing.
You remember that.
I was going to tap onto that too.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur as well, and bringing my daughter into like my entrepreneurial life.
Yeah.
You know, like her seeing me write, her coming to one of my speeches, kind of.
Right.
I think that's invaluable.
That's,
you know, you can't put measurement on that.
yeah, and going back to something that you said, I think that sometimes we feel like the verbal cues, we got to tell them, we got to do this, but you know, showing them, like literally showing them there's another way.
Or
you know,
learning from them.
That's right. And also learning from them, and also being involved in other kids' lives that might not have a father figure, meaning showing them.
Yes.
You bring them around, you show them processes, they understand that, you know, they don't have to take or do this other thing. They don't have to necessarily, speaking as an entrepreneur. I'm speaking as an entrepreneur, but at the same time, you know, they should see that, you know, you can do more. You know, and sometimes you don't have to tell them that, because I feel like children, you know, they learn by they're sponges. They learn by just looking at you. You know, they see what you do. They see how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you treat women, how you behave. And so they emulate that. You know, my son, sometimes he's on his phone doing his thing, but I know he's paying attention. You know?
Always paying
You know, Dad is home. Dad is doing this. Dad told me to pick this thing up. You know, he might not do it, but I know it's ingraining something, because my parents did the same thing to me. You know, I might not necessarily be like, yes, I'm going to do this. I love doing it. But now I'm older and I have my own children, and I'm like, I'm doing the same thing they told me to do. You know, so sometimes it's the cues and not necessarily the verbal part of it.
Absolutely.
You know, that's important.
Actions speak louder than words, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's it. Man, I mean, I could speak about this all day, man. It's fatherhood. I'm super, super passionate about it. And I love being around fellow gents who are like active fathers that are flawed, that's transparent, not perfect.
Right.
And I think if we, you know, step away from the perfection of fatherhood and really look at what's being provided to us, would be A-okay.
Yeah.
Man and female. Or
The perfection of fatherhood is that's an interesting term. I think sometimes we put expectations on our kids so that we can look good or feel good. And
That's true.
you know, and I think that that's also one of the kind of like unhealthy things or unhealthy practices that we kind of like have to let go of.
That's right.
One of the things that I've been doing recently is I've been spending a lot of time just listening and listening, because the kids are getting so much information nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And so listening to my children and actually trying to experience their world with them has been completely life-changing, because it gives me a lens into the future, to what's happening with our world. And then I'll sound like a sage, right? Because I can speak from experience and say, hey, you know, these are some things that you should be looking out for. But I can also learn from them and also recognize certain things from my generation that weren't healthy, that we shouldn't be carrying on to the next generation.
That's huge. That's huge. There's that. I mean, you're Jamaican, we're Caribbean, so we have that.
Be a lawyer, a doctor. We're learning that, especially for us as people, as parents, that entrepreneurship and some type of freedom is really what we're in search for.
There's alternatives. You know, it's not all one way or the other. You know, and going back to something that you said, listening to your children, man. You know, they'll tell you a lot about them. They'll tell you what they're into, what they're interested in, and I think that's a huge thing when it comes to being a parent. Is really knowing your child, because you know what they're going to be successful at based on just how they gravitate to one thing or the other. And I think some of the mistakes we make is we tend to, as Caribbean folks, we tend to sometimes be like, no, you should go get this job because the city job pays X amount of dollars, or this job is whatever it is, but that child might not be interested in it, you know. So
or might not be interested in college, or my daughter's like, you want to be an entrepreneur? She's like, no, Daddy, I want to be an artist. I'm like, you want to be an entrepreneur artist? Can we be halfway? You know, just because I'm learning what I'm learning.
Exactly.
Right? And
she'll gravitate.
Bring back the good and healthy information. You know, which I think is super, super important. And
she'll gravitate to that eventually.
Her being an artist, and she draws, and
she'll see you. She'll see it.
Sometimes we go back and forth. She's like, "No, Daddy." I'm like, you know, I was raised. You get popped for being resilient,
and that's another thing too. Yeah, that's the other thing too. So you know, our discipline, how we discipline our children.
It's different.
You know, that's something that I've had to adjust, and I think that you know, generationally, you kind of adjust because you're like, my parents did this thing, but did it really work?
But then where does getting whooped come from? You know, that was
that's
like
the
a
other
slave
thing.
act too.
Yeah, that was the fear.
Right? So that was like, master was whipping. So whippings really come from that, where you feel like in order to discipline, I came out okay, but you don't have to beat your kids for them to be.
I think that's the. I think that's the perpetuating the traumas. Right, the traumas that were enacted upon us, we thought were necessary, and so we perpetuated those traumas onto each other and onto our children.
That's right.
And so I know that for me, the lesson that I had to learn from that process was, you know what, my child or my children are not going to learn anything that I tell them, but only what I show them.
That's right.
And so my constant refrain especially to my oldest, is that if you don't discipline yourself, somebody else will.
That's right.
That's just the principle of life.
That's right.
Whatever you don't discipline yourself to do, somebody else is going to discipline you too. And so if you desire to be free, the best way to be free is through discipline. If you can discipline yourself, then you'll be free. And I think that, you know, I don't know if it's necessarily resonated yet, but I do believe that as she sees it in practice, as she kind of like pushes up against the wall, to resist against certain things that are just natural laws of human nature, she'll see those things.
Yeah.
And then that's my hope.
Yeah. I wonder if we sometimes discipline because we're afraid. You know, we're more afraid of what they're potentially going to be involved in, as opposed to them, you know, bringing the fear to the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I bear witness. That's facts.
That's right.
That's incredible. So,
Yes, sir.
whew, got to inhale, exhale. As you can see, this was very intense, a lot of jewels. I've learned a lot. I was able to absorb a lot. Again, we want to thank you guys for tuning into our Fatherhood Father's Day special. You're looking at AURN Digital. See you next time.